Okay, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the National Data Standards. This has been driven by the Attorney General's Department and the Data Standards Working Group. Now, the Data Standards Working Group includes reps from NACLAC. We've had a fair amount of input, as well as Legal Aid, FVPLS, Sector, ATSLs, etc. There is a most recent draft, and you should have a good look at it because it's going to feed into the way we're going to be doing stuff on class. Basically, CILSIS needed to be updated, and we've taken this opportunity to also implement the new data standards at the same time. Now, it's not unbelievably big changes, but there's some key issues that we need to get our heads around. Before I get you onto the new services, I just want to come back to class here and show you that there's also fields and field options that have changed. Essentially, we're trying to get common data standards. So for example, now all across the legal sector that is essentially funded by government, we're going to have first name is called a first name, last name is going to be called a last name instead of a surname or any other derivative. We've got things like gender has been updated, modernized, thankfully, and made consistent again across the sector when we have things like all the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander statuses, the country of birth, and things along those lines are now all the ABS standards. So we'll update that something like yearly as the ABS update them as well, and we'll be consistent with data across the whole sector and for government departments. So most of this is not scary stuff. So if I Google the National Legal Assistance Data Standards Manual, these are the kind of hits. We want to go to the Attorney General's page. This tells you all about it, and we can maybe hit on the PDF, and here it is. Look, you really only need the introduction to before it starts actually telling you about data collection at 17. So it's probably the first 16 pages are worth checking out. And what I'm going to be walking you through here is what is on page 3, because this tells us about all the services for individuals, services for the community that now translate into class as service types. So after that little graphic, it walks you through each of those: a discrete assistance, what is an information service, what is all the counting rules, etc. The key thing to understand is that there are a bunch of new services, as they call them, legal assistance services, and these are all the things down the side. Now, I don't necessarily expect you could be able to read this from the video. I will walk through them briefly, but you can certainly look at them and all the explanations for each of these in the manual. It's worth doing because it really help you get your head around. The big split is these services for individuals, and over the page we've got services for the community, which essentially are all your old CLE ones, so all your resources and activities, community education split, law and legal services reform, which is like your lobbying things, and stakeholder engagement for when you do stuff like turn up for sector events and things like quarterlies and whatnot. So back to here, I wanted to show you this. Over here on this side is, for example, legal advice you'd be familiar with, and down here we have court and tribunal representation. So it's worth noting here that the representation services, there are 3, court, tribunal, dispute resolution, and other representation services, are where all your CILSIS cases have ended up. Most cases will be court tribunal service. Up the top, you're familiar with information and referral, but there's some new things in terms of advice. They've teased out a legal task. That's kind of like just writing an individual letter or something along those lines. And here is also non-legal support, these which are gathered together called discrete assistances. And essentially they're meant to be one-off, but non-legal support, as we know, sometimes isn't just a one-off discrete assistance. It might go on for days or weeks, but you can still record all that information here, no problem, like as if it was a case. Got facilitated resolution process is a little thing as well. Most of us in our sector won't be using this, and this is not to be mixed up down here with dispute resolution. The dispute resolution is when you're looking after the client, in effect a representation, and the facilitated process is when you're actually setting up the process of a dispute resolution or similar yourself. Duty lawyer is now separate as well. It's when you're out there in the court or the tribunal and working all day there, and so we want to record all those separately. And down the bottom, just a sort of other representation, perhaps when you do a lot of representation work but it doesn't end up going to court or tribunal, maybe it settles or something similar. So let me show you quickly how this translates actually in class. The 2 types of services for the community, the CLE ones, are inside projects here under the community tab, but the majority of work for services are under class. And if we head to, for example, intake, you'll see the first thing is deciding what service type it is, and here they all are. You've got your informations, your referrals, your advices. We've split non-legal support in 2 because that was a big request, discrete or ongoing. And down the bottom, of course, we've got the court tribunal ones. We've also added our own service called triage. Go and look at the triage video if you want to find out about that. That essentially can be used when you're not really sure what service it is yet, particularly at the beginning. This also is reflected if we actually are creating a new service, and not everyone can do this outside of the intake procedure, but if you're allowed to, we can select which service type it is. And if we do that, all the fields change depending on what's applicable to that particular service. So here's a legal advice, and you've got all the service characteristics and things for legal advice. If we went down to a court tribunal, there's different things that appear for that.